Your neighbors are going to walk past your yard this summer and stop, not because you worked harder than they did, not because you spent more money than they did, and not because you suddenly became a landscape designer overnight. They're going to stop because you made one smart decision in April that they didn't. That's it. 1 month, a handful of the right perennials, and a yard that starts looking fuller, softer, richer, more established, and more alive than most people think is possible in a single season. That is the power of the right perennial planted at the right time. Because if you choose correctly in April, you are not just planting for this summer. You are planting for next year, and the year after that, and the year after that. You are planting things that spread while you sleep, multiply while you're busy, fill bare spaces while you're doing something else, and keep making your landscape look better long after annual flowers have died, faded, collapsed, or been ripped out and replaced. That's the difference between gardening for one season and designing a landscape that starts doing part of the work for you. And that difference begins right now, because April is not just another month on the calendar. April is the moment the entire season tips one way or the other. The soil is warming, the daylight is lengthening, moisture is still available in most regions, and root systems have time to establish before the stress of summer arrives. That matters more than most people realize. When you plant in April, the plant is not fighting two battles at once. It is not trying to survive extreme heat while also trying to root in. It is not being forced to bloom before it has settled. It is not entering the ground already under pressure. Instead, it gets a head start, cooler nights, moderate soil temperatures, longer establishment time, less stress, more root growth before summer. And for spreading perennials, that early root establishment is everything. Because the faster the roots settle, the faster the plant starts doing what you bought it for in the first place: spreading, thickening, covering, softening, blooming, and turning empty space into something that actually looks finished. That's what this list is about. Not just pretty flowers, not just good plants, but 11 perennials that can spread fast enough, fill hard enough, and return reliably enough that a single April planting can completely change the way your yard looks by midsummer, and even more by next year. Some will solve slopes, some will choke out weeds, some will pull hummingbirds into your yard, some will thrive where other plants fail, some will fix those awkward border edges that always look unfinished, and some will carry your garden visually all the way into fall when everything else is tired. So if you've got a bare patch, a dead corner, a problem slope, a weak border, a place where mulch keeps showing through, or simply a yard that looks fine but not full, this is where that changes. Let's start with one of the most dramatic ground covers you can plant in spring. Creeping phlox. Most people do not realize how powerful this plant is until they see it massed. One pot in a nursery doesn't tell the truth. A single little plant sitting in a plastic container looks harmless, modest, even, almost easy to overlook. But then you see a slope covered in it, a stone wall spilling over with it, a border edge completely lined with it in full bloom, and suddenly it makes sense, because creeping phlox does not bloom politely. It erupts. It turns into a carpet of color, dense enough to almost hide the foliage underneath. Pink, white, lavender, violet, magenta, not as scattered flowers, but as sheets of color that seem to pour over the ground like paint. That visual effect is why so many people regret not planting it sooner. But the beauty is only half the story. The real strength of creeping phlox is that it does exactly what problem spaces need. It spreads low, roots as it moves, hugs the ground, and creates coverage where many upright perennials simply fail to make an impact. If you have a slope that's annoying to mow, a dry edge near a path, a sunny bank, a rocky shoulder, or one of those awkward spaces where grass never looked right, this is where creeping phlox starts earning its place. It is hardy across a wide range of American climates and performs best in full sun or very light shade, especially in well-drained soil. That detail matters. It does not want to sit in wet, heavy ground. If the area stays soggy, this is not the plant's best life, but in a sunny, slightly leaner spot. It becomes one of the most reliable spreaders in the garden. Its habit is simple and effective. It moves outward, not upward. Stems trail, touch soil, root, and continue. Over time, one plant becomes a colony. Not overnight, but steadily, predictably, and in the kind of way that makes a landscape look more mature every year with less and less help from you. That is one of the hidden pleasures of perennial gardening. The first year you plant. The second year you notice. The third year you benefit. And creeping phlox is a classic example of that rhythm. Now here is the one mistake people make with it. They treat it like a plant that blooms and then can be forgotten. It can be low maintenance, yes, but if you shear it lightly after bloom, just enough to keep it tidy and dense, you get a healthier, tighter mat and better performance the next season. That tiny act of maintenance makes a big difference, because the goal is not simply to keep it alive. The goal is to make it look like it belongs there so completely that no one remembers the space before it. That is what good ground cover does. And creeping phlox is one of the best spring answers to that problem. Daylily, there are plants that survive almost anywhere, and then there are plants that seem to thrive almost out of spite. Daylilies belong to the second group. This is one of the most forgiving, adaptable, and broadly useful perennials in American landscaping. And there's a reason it has lasted in gardens for generations. It can handle more climate variation, more soil inconsistency, and more neglect than many people think possible from something so attractive. That matters because a lot of gardeners are tired. Tired of planting things that demand perfect soil, perfect watering, perfect attention, perfect placement. Daylilies do not require perfection. They require a chance. And once they get that chance, they begin doing what makes them so valuable. They form clumps, then larger clumps, then divisions, then masses. One plant becomes several. Several become a border. A border becomes a sweep. And all of that happens without the constant rebuying cycle that makes annual gardening so expensive over time. Visually, daylilies are flexible in a way few plants are. You can choose hot orange, deep burgundy, soft peach, lemon yellow, near white, pink, purple, bicolors, ruffled edges, giant blooms, smaller flowers, early bloomers, late bloomers. The range is so wide that the plant almost stops feeling like a species and starts feeling like a design category. That's part of why they work in so many landscapes. They can look cottage-style, bold and hot, calm and pastel, roadside tough, or surprisingly refined. But beyond the flower, the real strength is in the foliage mass. Healthy daylilies create arching mounds that shade the soil, reduce visual emptiness, and help suppress weed germination simply by occupying space thoroughly. That makes them extremely useful in long borders, fence lines, mailbox beds, driveway edges, utility areas, and those spots where you want fullness without constant attention. For planting, April is ideal because the plant can root in before the heat of summer arrives. Full sun usually gives the best bloom, though some varieties tolerate light shade. The soil does not need to be extraordinary, but like almost any perennial, it appreciates decent drainage and enough room to expand. And expand it will. That is not speculation. That is its nature. The longer a clump sits, the larger and more productive it becomes, until eventually it is ready to be divided. And division is where daylilies become not just good plants, but one of the best economic deals in gardening, because a mature clump can become multiple plants. Real plants, blooming plants, landscape-sized plants. Not little seedlings you have to baby for years. That means every few years, the plant pays you back in material. You can move divisions around your yard, fill new beds, trade with friends, or simply thicken an existing border for free. That is why daylilies endure. They are not just pretty. They are profitable in the language of landscape value. Now, one important caution: if cats spend time in your garden, daylilies require serious care in decision-making because they are dangerous to cats. That is not a minor side note. It matters. But in the right setting, with that fact respected, daylilies are one of the strongest plant once. Benefit for years perennials you can choose. Bee balm. Some plants look good. Some plants create moments. Bee balm creates moments. This is the plant that makes people pause Because something is moving in the flowers. A hummingbird hovering in place, a swallowtail drifting through, bumblebees working with complete focus, butterflies landing and lifting again. It turns the garden from something you look at into something you witness. That is a different kind of value. Because a landscape is not only about color and structure, it is also about life, movement, sound, presence, the feeling that the garden is not just decorative, but functioning as part of a larger living system. Bee balm does that better than almost anything on this list. Its flowers are impossible to ignore. Spiky, almost explosive heads in red, magenta, pink, purple, sometimes white, not smooth or delicate, but energetic. They look alive even before the pollinators arrive, and once the pollinators do arrive, the whole plant feels animated. This is one reason people fall in love with it quickly. But there is another layer to the story. Bee balm spreads, not like a thug in every garden, but certainly with intention. It forms colonies through underground movement and can fill a generous space over a few seasons if conditions are right. That makes it ideal for pollinator beds, back borders, wildlife gardens, cottage-style mass plantings, and any area where you want midsummer color with movement and ecological value. April is a smart time to plant it because the cooler weather lets it settle before the high-demand season begins. It prefers sun to light shade and likes soil with a bit more moisture than some of the tougher, drier plants on this list. Not swampy soil, but not baked, starved dryness either. If you give it decent conditions, it rewards you with speed. And here is one of its most charming hidden features. The leaves are fragrant and traditionally used for tea, especially in the bergamot family of flavors that people often associate with Earl Grey. That means you are not only planting for wildlife and color, you are also planting a useful herbaceous perennial with sensory value beyond the flower. Now, there is a common complaint about bee balm, powdery mildew, and that complaint is real, but manageable. The answer is not to avoid the plant completely. The answer is to choose good cultivars, give it airflow, and avoid cramming it into stagnant corners. That is how experienced gardeners handle plants. Not by pretending they have no issues, but by learning what makes them perform well. And when bee balm performs well, it becomes unforgettable. It is one of those plants that changes how a summer garden feels. Black-eyed Susan. There is something deeply American about black-eyed Susan. You see it along roadsides, open fields, old gardens, naturalized plantings, and summer borders. And yet people still underestimate how effective it is in a home landscape. Maybe because it looks familiar. Maybe because it feels common. Maybe because people assume familiar means ordinary. But that is a mistake. Black-eyed Susan is one of the best long-performing, easy-spreading perennials for midsummer through fall color, especially if your goal is to create that glowing, warm, sunlit look that still reads clearly from a distance. Its flowers are simple in structure and powerful in effect, golden petals around a dark central cone. But massed, they become electric. A drift of them catches light beautifully, especially in late afternoon. They do not whisper. They radiate, and that long bloom season matters enormously. A lot of gardens peak too early. They look good in May, maybe June, and then they thin out visually as summer deepens. Black-eyed Susan solves that. It steps in when spring bloomers are gone and keeps carrying visual energy deep into the season. That makes it extremely valuable in a border where you need continuity rather than a single peak. It also spreads in the kind of reliable, practical way that makes a perennial financially worthwhile. The clump expands from below, but the plant also drops seed, meaning over time you can get a looser colony effect if you let it. That makes it excellent for meadow-style plantings, sunny borders, pollinator strips, naturalized edges, and low-maintenance American-style landscapes. This is not a plant for fussing over. It likes sun. It appreciates decent drainage. And once established, it can take a fair amount of real-world neglect without collapsing. That alone makes it useful. But there is more. If you leave the seed heads standing into fall and winter, birds use them. That means the plant's value does not end when the flower fades. It keeps contributing, visually, ecologically, structurally, and that is one of the best themes in all good perennial design. The plant should matter for more than 1 month. Black-eyed Susan does. Yarrow some plants are for pampered soil. Yarrow is not one of them. In fact, one of the fastest ways to make yarrow underperform is to treat it too kindly. Rich, overly wet, heavily fed soil can make it floppy, weak, and disappointing. But give it sun, leaner ground, and a bit of space, and suddenly it becomes one of the toughest and most useful perennials in the entire landscape. This plant thrives where other things sulk. That alone earns attention. If you have a dry strip by the driveway, a rocky section, poor soil near a sidewalk, a hot bed where irrigation is inconsistent, or one of those punishing spots where everything else looks tired by July, yarrow is a serious answer. Its foliage is feathery, aromatic, and soft in texture, which gives it visual finesse even before the flowers open. Then come the flat-topped flower heads in white, yellow, pink, coral red, or mixed tones depending on the cultivar. Those flat flower platforms are more important than they look, because that flower shape attracts beneficial insects, hoverflies, lacewings, parasitic wasps, all the unsung helpers that work quietly in a garden by preying on softer-bodied pests. So yarrow is doing 2 jobs at once, making the garden look better and supporting the biological systems that make the whole space healthier. That is one reason so many experienced gardeners continue using it. It's not only a flower, it's a working plant, and it spreads through roots, through time, and sometimes by seed, depending on the type and conditions. One clump can become a real colony, especially in open, sunny planting areas where you are trying to cover more space without relying on thirsty or fragile choices. It's also deer and rabbit resistant more often than not, thanks in part to its aromatic foliage. That makes it valuable in places where browsing pressure has already made you regret half your planting decisions. Now, if you want yarrow to look good, the secret is not rich soil. It's restraint. Do not overwater it. Do not overfeed it. Do not plant it in a heavy, crowded spot where it stretches and collapses. Put it where it can be exactly what it wants to be, strong, upright, sun-loving, and free to spread. Then step back and let it prove why old-fashioned tough plants still matter. Catmint. There are few plants more useful at the front of a border than catmint. And there are few plants more underestimated by beginners. At first glance, it looks soft, a little airy, a little relaxed. Nothing dramatic. Then it grows. Then it blooms. Then it spills. Then the pollinators show up. Then the deer ignore it. Then the border suddenly looks finished. That's when people understand what catmint is really doing. This is a plant that solves shape problems. Hard lines feel softer with it. Path edges look more natural with it. Driveways, walkways, stone borders, rose beds, cottage gardens, mixed borders, all of them become easier to design when catmint is involved because it bridges that gap between upright structure and loose abundance. The flower color helps too. That blue-lavender range works with nearly everything. Warm colors, cool colors, silver foliage, roses, grasses, yellow flowers, white flowers, catmint rarely clashes, which makes it one of the easiest long-lived perennials to use beautifully. But the real advantage is how much it gives, for how little it asks. It spreads gradually. It blooms generously. It handles dry conditions well once established. It smells strongly enough to discourage deer in many cases. And if you shear it after the first major flush, it often comes back better. That regrowth is where the plant becomes truly valuable, because a lot of perennials bloom once, then sit there green and passive for the rest of the season. Catmint gives you a second act, and in garden design, second acts matter. A plant that renews itself visually makes the whole border feel fresher longer. For planting, April is ideal because it gives the plant time to anchor in before summer begins. Full sun is best for bloom and shape. Decent drainage is important. If the soil stays too wet, especially in winter, it can struggle. But in average to well-drained conditions, it becomes one of the best long-term investments in a low, spreading perennial border layer. It's elegant without being delicate, resilient without looking rough, useful without looking utilitarian. That combination is rare. Hardy geranium, this may be the most underused plant on the entire list. Not because it isn't good, because most people don't know what it is. They hear geranium and think of the bright annuals sold everywhere, each spring in red, pink, or salmon, sitting in pots outside grocery stores and garden centers. That is not this. Hardy geranium is a completely different category of plant, and once you understand it, you start noticing that the best gardeners seem to use it constantly, especially in those difficult spaces that need softness, spread, and reliability more than dramatic vertical bloom. This is a plant for the spaces between certainty, under light shade, around shrubs, at the front of a woodland edge, in dry shade under established trees, at the edge of a border, where the soil is not perfect and the light shifts through the day. That kind of flexibility is rare. Most flowering plants want clear conditions, full sun, good moisture, predictability. Hardy geranium is more forgiving. It can handle harder realities. And because of that, it becomes useful in the exact spots where many landscapes fail to feel finished. Visually, it forms mounding foliage and then sends up flowers in soft whites, pinks, purples, and blues depending on the cultivar. Some varieties flower longer than people expect, and many create such a good foliage presence that even when bloom slows, the plant continues contributing shape and texture. That matters because a landscape is not just flowers. It's what happens between flowers. And hardy geranium is one of the best between plants there is. It spreads without becoming a nightmare. It fills without suffocating. It softens edges, covers low bare areas, and gives continuity to spaces that otherwise feel broken up. If you have a spot where mulch shows too much, weeds keep popping in around bigger plants, tree roots make the area difficult, or your border looks patchy below waist height, this is the kind of perennial that quietly fixes that. And because it's so often overlooked, it still feels like insider knowledge when you use it well. Garden phlox, some plants win with color. Some win with scent. Garden phlox wins with both. This is the plant that turns a summer evening into an experience, not only because the flower heads are large and generous, but because the fragrance carries. And when fragrance carries, it changes the way a garden is lived in. You don't just see it from a distance. You notice it while walking past, while sitting outside, while standing at an open window, while watering at dusk. That kind of sensory presence makes a plant more memorable than almost anything visual alone can do. And then there's the flower display itself. Large panicles in pink, lavender, red, white, rose, bicolors, rich enough to stand out in the border at exactly the time of year when many spring stars are long finished and the garden needs something to step forward. This is one reason garden phlox has endured for more than a century in American gardens. It fills the midsummer gap beautifully. Now, phlox has a reputation for powdery mildew, and like bee balm, the reputation exists for a reason. But once again, the answer is not avoid the plant. The answer is choose strong cultivars, give it air, water wisely, and don't cram it into stagnant corners. Do that, and it becomes a showpiece. It's also excellent for cutting, which makes it more valuable than many gardeners realize. A plant that performs outdoors and also works indoors in a vase doubles its worth instantly. For planting, give it sun or very light shade, decent soil, and a place where it has some breathing room. April planting lets the roots establish before the heavier demand of summer bloom, which means a better show and a stronger plant going forward. And if your garden has ever felt like it peaks too early and then drifts, garden phlox is one of the best ways to fix that. Goldenrod, there may be no plant on this list more unfairly misunderstood than goldenrod. For decades, people blamed it for allergies. People saw it blooming in fall, sneezed nearby, and assumed the bright yellow flowers were the cause. But the real problem was ragweed, blooming at the same time, with airborne pollen designed to travel through the air and into human noses. Goldenrod's pollen is heavy and sticky. It travels by insect, not by wind in the same way. That misunderstanding matters, because it kept one of the most ecologically valuable fall-blooming native perennials out of far too many gardens. And that's a shame, because goldenrod is not just beautiful, it is strategic. It blooms when most gardens are running out of gas. That late-season role is incredibly important. By September, many borders look tired. Summer is fading. Spring is long gone. Annuals may still be working, but the deeper perennial framework often needs help. Goldenrod steps into that moment and lights it up. And not timidly. Some varieties arch like fireworks, throwing sprays of gold outward in all directions. Others create upright plumes. But in every case, the visual effect is energetic, warm, and unmistakably autumnal in the best sense, not tired, but glowing. Then there is the ecological side. Goldenrod is a powerhouse for pollinators and beneficial insects, especially late in the season when nectar becomes harder to find. That means planting it is not just a design decision. It is a support decision for the larger life of the garden. Now it spreads. That is part of the appeal, but also part of the responsibility. In a naturalized space, that can be exactly what you want. In a more formal border, it may need dividing or thoughtful placement so it doesn't overwhelm quieter neighbors. That is not a flaw. That is simply the reality of a vigorous perennial. And vigorous perennials are exactly what this list is about. 10. Lamb's ear. Some plants create color. Some create softness. Lamb's ear creates memory. Because the moment someone touches it, they remember it. Children remember it. Guests remember it. People who don't even care about gardening remember it. That tactile quality makes it one of the most unusually powerful design plants you can use. It gives the garden a sensory layer that most landscapes completely lack. But it is not just a novelty. Visually, the silver foliage is incredibly valuable. Silver acts like a neutral and an amplifier at the same time. It cools hot colors, sharpens purple, softens pink, brightens deep greens, and creates contrast that makes surrounding flowers look more intentional. That means lamb's ear is not only beautiful by itself, it makes nearby plants look better. That is a rare and important landscape function. It also spreads well through low growth and surface movement, gradually filling ground-level gaps and suppressing some weed pressure simply by occupying space. In sunny, fairly dry, well-drained conditions, it becomes a durable, low-maintenance edging or filler plant that can visually connect different parts of the border. This is why designers love it. It creates cohesion, that soft silver ribbon effect along a path, beneath roses, in front of bold perennials. Or, linking scattered groupings together makes a garden feel more composed without feeling rigid. And because the foliage itself is the main event, the plant continues to matter even when flowers are not the focus. That gives it a season-long usefulness many flowering-only plants cannot match. If the soil is too wet, especially in humid conditions, it can struggle. So once again, drainage matters. But plant it right, in a bright and reasonably dry spot, and it becomes one of the easiest ways to add both spread and sophistication to the landscape. New England aster. If the earlier plants on this list build the body of the season, New England aster writes the ending, and the ending matters because too many gardens quit early. They start strong, they peak somewhere between late spring and midsummer, then by early fall they begin to fade into brown, fatigue, and visual silence. New England aster does the opposite. It waits, and then when the air cools, when the light changes, when mornings start feeling different and the rest of the landscape begins slowing down, it explodes. Rich purple, pink, lavender, violet, and sometimes white blooms with golden centers, often in such numbers that the plant becomes a dome of color. And because the autumn light is lower and warmer, those colors feel even more saturated than they do in summer. That's what makes asters so powerful in a fall landscape. They do not merely continue. They intensify, and then there is the monarch connection. Late-season asters provide nectar when migrating monarchs and many other pollinators need it most. That means the plant is not just extending your garden's beauty. It is participating in one of the great seasonal movements of the natural world. That alone gives it weight. In terms of growth, asters spread through time into larger clumps and can also self-seed depending on conditions. That means one planting becomes more significant every year. But there is one trick experienced gardeners know. Pinching. If you pinch the stems back earlier in the season, you get a bushier, sturdier, more floriferous plant later. Skip that, and some asters can become taller and looser than you wanted. Do it, and the plant transforms into a far better performer. That kind of small technique makes a huge difference with some perennials, and with asters, it is worth learning. Because when fall arrives and your garden still has that much color left in it, the entire space feels better designed, better managed, and more alive than the average yard around it. That's how a season finishes strong. Why April changes everything by now. The pattern should be obvious. This list is not really about flowers alone. It is about momentum. April gives these plants momentum. That is what people miss when they plant late, and then wonder why the same perennial they saw online or in someone else's yard isn't performing the same way in their own garden. Timing changes the plant's first year, and the first year changes everything after that. When a perennial goes in during April, it gets one of the greatest gifts any plant can receive: time. Time to root before heat, time to settle before blooming hard, time to connect with the soil before drought arrives, time to become established enough that summer does not feel like a threat. That extra rooting window turns into faster spread, better bloom, better drought tolerance, better winter survival, and stronger second-year performance. That is why April matters so much. Not because it is fashionable to plant then, because the biology is better. 3 rules that make this whole list work before you rush out and buy everything on the list. There are 3 rules that matter more than any individual plant choice. Rule 1. Fix drainage first. A lot of perennial failures are not plant failures. They are drainage failures. If the soil stays wet too long, roots suffocate, crowns rot, and the plant underperforms no matter how good the variety was supposed to be. That means before planting, you need to know, does water move through this area, or does it sit? If it sits, address that first. Amend wisely. Raise the bed if needed. Do not expect the plant to solve a soil problem it was never meant to survive. Rule 2. Division is free money. Every strong perennial on this list becomes more valuable over time because it can be divided, expanded, or spread through the landscape. That means a plant you bought once becomes a border next year, a second bed later, or free material for another part of your yard. People spend shocking amounts of money each spring replacing what they could have multiplied. Do not do that. A mature perennial is not just a plant. It is inventory. Rule 3. Do not overclean the garden in fall seed heads, stems, structure, and residues all have ecological value depending on the plant and the condition of the garden. Birds feed on seed. Beneficial insects overwinter in stems and litter. Visual structure remains in the landscape after bloom. That doesn't mean leave disease everywhere. It means stop assuming that tidy always means healthy. The best gardens often carry life through winter because they leave enough behind for the ecosystem to keep functioning. That matters more than many people realize. The real payoff if you plant the right spreading perennials this April, the first payoff comes fast. By summer, your borders look fuller, your bare spots shrink, pollinators increase, the garden looks more intentional, and you begin feeling that shift from new planting to real landscape. But the deeper payoff is later. Next year, the plants are larger. The year after that, they begin touching. Then certain areas stop needing mulch. Some stop needing annual filler. Some stop needing much at all. That is when perennial gardening becomes addictive. Not because it is flashy. Because it compounds. You plant once. You benefit repeatedly. You multiply without rebuying. And the yard starts doing more of the visual work on its own. That is what makes these April decisions so powerful. They are small decisions now, but they create a much bigger garden later. Closing, you do not need 50 new plants this spring. You need the right ones, in the right places, at the right time. That time is April. So if you are looking at your yard right now and thinking about a bare patch, a weak border, a dead slope, a weedy edge, a dry spot, a place deer keep hitting, or a garden that looks decent but not finished, start here. Start with spreaders. Start with perennials that come back. Start with plants that do not ask you to begin from zero every year, because the smartest garden decision is rarely the fanciest one. It is usually the one that keeps paying you back. So tell me this, which one from this list would you plant first this April, and what kind of space are you trying to fix? Because one smart planting decision this month can absolutely change what your yard looks like by July. And even more importantly, It can change what it looks like for years.